Hey everybody, welcome to this week's ECH Debate. This week we're talking coaches. So RJ, of course, a couple weeks ago, GM Ron Francis had a press conference and he talked about his coach hiring timeline. It sounds like he's waiting till the end of the year, the end of the season, I should say, which we both talked about makes a lot of sense because that's when you'll have a clear picture as far as who's available. It means you can start talking to other teams' assistant coaches and all of that stuff. Long gone are the great old days of when there was a coaching vacancy in the NHL and you could just say, should be Mark Crawford. Bring him back from Switzerland or whatever, and it'll just plug him in there. Done. We're done. It's easy, right? Unfortunately, we're not in those situations anymore, and we of course saw how well Mark Crawford's eventual NHL return ended up going. Not quite the way we all thought it would, but as far as who Seattle is going to hire, we got a couple coaching options that we're going to talk about today. Going to go ahead and start it off with the elephant in the room, though, and that is, of course, Rod Brindlemore. He worked with Ron Francis in Carolina. They know each other. They have a good working relationship. Rod Brindlemore does become a free agent at the end of this season. He never signed a contract extension in Carolina, which surprised many, but also caused many to think that, well, he probably did that so he could go and join Ron Francis in Seattle. We don't know that, though. It's totally possible that Brindlemore does decide to stay in Carolina, especially if, they win a Stanley Cup or something. I got to think it would be pretty hard to leave. But I think we're both in agreement, as well as most people, that if Brindlemore is available, he should 100% be who Seattle gets to coach this team. So let's move on to kind of some other people, because, like we said, if he's available, we're taking him. Who's kind of the next man up, so to speak, in your opinion, RJ?
Well, the next man up, and I think in a lot of people's minds, is Gerard Gallant. And, by some measure, he would seem like the obvious choice as the best coach for the Kraken. Coaching an NHL expansion team under this new kind of expansion format. It's a unique kind of job. It's different from any other coaching job. And Gallant is really the only person in the world who's done it before. And he's done it with about as much success as you can possibly hope for and ask for. He took the Golden Knights to the Stanley Cup Finals in their inaugural season. And, he did it using a fast-paced, quick, fun-to-watch transition style that generated a lot of offense off the rush and kind of took the NHL by storm at the time. And I think that helped also win a lot of new hockey fans over, with an expansion team and especially in a non-traditional market like Vegas. Vegas was his third stint as an NHL head coach. He coached the Florida Panthers from 2014 to 2016 and the Blue Jackets from 2004 to 2006. So he more than satisfies that experience element that Ron Francis is looking for. In that press conference, he said that, in a perfect world, he'd like to hire someone who's, been a head coach before and who has had that experience, although he would consider others that hadn't if they interviewed well. And Gallant has never had a sub 500 record in any of his seasons with the Golden Knights or the Panthers. And, just by about any measure, he's a great head coach, and it's kind of crazy he's still on the market. But there is one area where Gallant might not be the best fit, and that's the use of analytics. We've heard that Gallant isn't all that crazy about analytics and using them heavily in his coaching. And if that's the case, I don't really know how well that would work out with Ron Francis and the Kraken, who are pretty committed to using analytics from top to bottom in their organization. So Dylan, do you think that's a difference that they could overcome? And, is Gallant kind of the obvious top choice that he would seem at first?
He certainly seems like the obvious top choice, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Part of why he's not still with Vegas, despite all the success he had there, was he kept clashing with the front office over their use of analytics. So to me, that would say Gerard Gallant is probably not going to be a fit for Seattle. And, that's okay. Like, Ron Francis, I trust him completely. You look at, the team he built in Carolina. I trust him. I trust his use of analytics. I trust him putting faith in that. So I don't really want the Kraken to have a coach that's going to be fighting him on everything all the time. I don't think that'll be beneficial to anybody. With that in mind, look at other potential coaches. As you said, Ron Francis said he would like someone with some head coaching experience. Why not somebody who is right now a head coach in the NHL, although maybe not for long? And that's Travis Green. So he's, of course, the coach of the Vancouver Canucks. But it does seem pretty certain that Green is going to be let go by the Canucks at the end of this season, as we see this kind of latest rendition of a bad GM firing a good coach just so he can keep his job, right? And look, I totally get that Vancouver's been really disappointing this year, and Travis Green does have a role in that. That said, they had some really massive roster upheaval this offseason, and then because of COVID and all those situations around that, they didn't exactly get a normal offseason program to kind of work through those things. He didn't get a chance to pull the team together. He didn't get a chance for everyone to work together, build chemistry with each other. And, I think he's a much better coach than what the Canucks record this season says. I mean, you just look at Vancouver's records the previous couple seasons when we would argue that they were kind of overperforming expectations, right? I also think Green's history in the Pacific Northwest hockey community can't be ignored. Not only does he have all the Vancouver connections because he's been there for a couple years, but he really learned and developed as a coach under Mike Johnston with the Portland Winterhawks and the great run that they had in the last decade. He was very much a part of that. And I think he knows, because of that, he knows this area. He has relationships with all of the youth and professional communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. And I think that could really help Seattle as they try to build their footprint in the area. I also got to give him a shout out because he was with Portland while I was there. And so, while I didn't directly work with him, I still got to rep one of my guys. But what do you think, RJ? What do you think of Travis Green? One, do you think he'll be available at the end of the season? And two, do you think he'd be a good fit for the Kraken?
Right. Well, first question, will he be available? On paper, I would say it would be the very wise thing to do for the Canucks to re-sign him. I mean, given all the adversity the Canucks have faced this season, I do think that their record isn't really the best indication of what Green can do as a coach, and especially last couple games coming off of their long COVID absence, where they were hit the toughest of anyone by COVID, and they come back and they beat the Maple Leafs twice. And it shows kind of what Green's able to do as far as reining in this team and making sure they're motivated. But as Canucks fans will tell you, you cannot always trust Jim Benning to make the wise and correct decision. So I think there could be a pretty good possibility that Green would be available. And if he is, I think he's someone the Kraken have to consider. Like you said, he already has ties to kind of the Pacific Northwest region. And one of the things he's done with the Canucks the last couple of seasons is developing these younger players. And that's where you see the most growth coming from on their roster. And the Kraken are going to have a young team, and he's going to be able to help develop those guys. I think you look at where the Canucks problems are roster wise, and it's these, older players, bigger contracts that Benning has saddled the team with. And while Green has done what he can to work with that, that's kind of been where it's gone wrong, and that's not entirely his fault. So the next potential coach who's been in the conversation a little bit, who also has some NHL head coaching experience, is Bruce Boudreau. So pretty much the entire conversation about Boudreau as a candidate for the Kraken stems from an article that Ryan Clark did in The Athletic last month, where Boudreau said that he would be very interested in coaching the Kraken and it would be an exciting opportunity for him. And pretty much the whole article was Boudreau kind of expressing his strong interest in potentially coaching the Kraken. And when I first read it, I thought, well, yeah, I too would be very interested in coaching the Kraken, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen or it would be the wise decision for them. Boudreau, if you look at the regular season numbers, you can make a case for maybe why he should be in the mix as a coaching candidate. And he's got 567 career wins to only 302 losses. His teams have won their division 8 times. And, I should mention, he seems like a really nice guy. And, by all accounts, his players love him. He's a real players coach. So, I don't want to seem too harsh on him here. But the problem with Boudreau has always been the playoffs. I mean, the game changes in the playoffs, and Boudreau and his teams just don't change with it. I know the playoffs are an inherently small sample size, and even the top coaches have kind of found their teams bested by bad luck, injuries, or, just pure randomness. But with Boudreau, it does rise to the level of a pattern. With the Capitals, those super talented teams, they won their division 4 times and they couldn't get past the second round. They lost to seeds, 6, 4, 8, and 5, despite never having been lower than a 3 seed. Then he moves on to the Ducks, and he fared a little bit better. He got to one conference final, but he was fired after the fourth consecutive year of being eliminated in a Game 7. And looking back at how talented we know those teams were, it's really hard to say that Boudreau got the best out of what he had. And frankly, I think he shouldn't be on any NHL team's coaching radar. So Dylan, am I being too harsh here? What do you think of Boudreau as a potential option for the Kraken?
No, I don't think you're being too harsh at all. I think that's the obvious criticism is he was never able to get it done in the playoffs. And the bottom line is he was working with, as you said, kind of two of the most talented rosters in all of the NHL at the time. And he just couldn't do it. And, obviously we've seen since he left Washington has won a cup with that roster. So it wasn't like, Ovechkin couldn't do it or Backstrom couldn't do it. No, it was whatever Boudreau was doing was the problem. He left, and shortly after they won a Stanley Cup. So as you said, those Anaheim teams I think went kind of under the radar for most people around the NHL because they're out on the West Coast, but they were really, really good teams, and those playoff losses were really, really disappointing for them. And then kind of to top it all off, you've just kind of seen diminishing returns from him as time has gone on, especially his time in Minnesota, where there was nothing memorable about that, like kind of good or bad, which is I guess okay, but it's not what you'd want for an expansion club trying to make a name for itself, not just in the NHL, but also within the Seattle market. I just don't think he'd be a good fit for them. And I think it is telling that you have a guy with this much success that, no NHL teams have really been kicking the tires on. Like, it seems like the NHL has decided to kind of move forward from him. So the next guy I'm going to bring up is Todd Nelson. Now, Todd Nelson is currently an assistant coach with the Dallas Stars. But really, as far as his head coaching experience, he fell victim to that pre-Connor McDavid era in Edmonton where, they were just kind of chewing through coaches because everyone was struggling despite them having all of these top picks and all these top players. And, everybody in the media, all of us fans were just always asking the question of how are you not better when you have access to all of these great players, right? But I think as we all look back on that, hindsight being 2020, we realized that a lot of those coaches weren't really the problems. The rosters were really bad, and as we now know, the culture kind of from the top down was just horrendous and really counter to being able to win and building a winning team. So I don't think you can kind of put those failures of Edmonton onto Todd Nelson at all as coach, especially because he was really only there for about half a season. I know that doesn't sound great, but hear me out. So he was actually one of the better coaches Edmonton had during all of those stints where they were just perennially picking first overall. He was there in the 2014-2015 season, and he actually coached Edmonton to a 17-22-7 record, so he was almost 500. Now, he was let go because at the time that was disappointing, but you look at how the team finished that season, and they finished 7-22-7. So he did way better with that team than anybody else was going to be doing with that team. And since he was fired at Edmonton, he's moved on to be an assistant. Like I said, he's assistant now in Dallas, where that coaching staff has done a fantastic job as far as getting the most out of that roster and really building an interesting team as far as the systems that they use, the style of play that they use. We saw it last year. They made it to the Stanley Cup Finals in a very less than optimal situation, being within that bubble. And they kind of made it look easy. And that coaching staff, I think, played a big part in that as far as getting that team to buy in and be together in that. And then you just toss on his minor league coaching record where he's won championships at every level of the minor league system. He's been super successful. He was the coach of the Grand Rapids Griffins for a really long time as part of the Detroit farm system. If you know anything about the Detroit farm system, it's always been a very good system that speaks highly of his abilities, that they thought highly of him. So I think Todd Nelson's, he's not like a name that you hear thrown around a lot, but I think he's a guy that probably deserves another shot at being a head coach. And I think based on his developmental history working in the minor leagues and the stuff that he's done in Dallas and what they've been able to do there, I think he could kind of be that Gerard Gallant who can, kind of go to an expansion team and maybe surprise on the upside with them. But what do you think, RJ?
Yeah, I think I like what he does systems wise. I think you touched on, with what they do in Dallas, it's, as kind of an interesting system and how they've succeeded. And I do think Todd Nelson plays a big part in that. My one concern is his with the minor league coaching. With you said he was with the Grand Rapids Griffins, the Red Wings system. Also, before he was named the Oilers head coach, he was head coach of the Oklahoma City Barons for a while, the Oilers AHL team. And one thing I do worry about is just player development. As the Red Wings system has always been a good one, but kind of recently in those, 2015, 2017 years, it hasn't been, quite as good as it was. And same thing with the Oilers and the Barons. There was a reason that Oilers roster, was not very good when Nelson took over. And a lot of that had to do with that they weren't able to, develop their draft picks and kind of bring them up through the system to be productive players. No, I'm not blaming Nelson, entirely for that, but it is something that just gives me pause a little bit. And, of course, that was a while ago, that ended in 2015. And I think he's, done a great job since. So, I mean, you probably can't, put a whole lot of that on him, but it's enough that I would think maybe there are better candidates. And one of those better candidates, and this is kind of more of an outside the box idea that I'm really excited to talk about, is Rikard Gronborg. So if the name didn't tip you off, he's Swedish. He coached at the college and junior levels in North America early in his career. And he even spent a season with the Spokane Chiefs in 04-05. So he has a little bit of familiarity with the area. But his real work started after that. He took over the Swedish national program. He kind of overhauled their whole philosophy. He kind of wrote a new training playbook, implemented the entire system, really. He coached the Swedish men's team, the under-20 team, the under-18 team. And he really kind of took charge of coaching duties for Sweden. And he had a lot of success there. He won 3 World Championship gold medals, World Junior gold, and lots of other top 3 finishes. And, what was missing, though, from his resume was coaching a club team. So a couple of years ago, he joined the ZSC Lions in Switzerland. And they were one of the most prestigious teams in Switzerland. They have a storied history. If you remember, they were Austin Matthews' team before he was drafted in the NHL. But when he took over, they were in pretty bad shape. They had, finished 10th place in the league, and he kind of has completely turned them around since. They're back near the top of the league again, and he's done a really great job there. As far as his coaching style, he kind of describes it as a hybrid between the European and North American game. And he kind of feels that it's going that way anyway. As we know, the North American game's kind of gotten less physical. It's more skill-based. It's a little faster. So, maybe a hybrid style like that could work here. He's also kind of tried to innovate off the ice. One thing that I like that he does is he has a monthly sit down with his players where they get to set the agenda. If they want to talk hockey, great. If they want to talk about something else, that's fine too. Regardless of where Gronborg ends up coaching in the NHL, I will be very interested to see kind of how he's able to do and how he does things differently. And he will coach in the NHL. It's only a matter of time. NHL teams tried to interview him last offseason, but the Lions wouldn't let him out of his deal, which at the time still had another year left on it. And I don't blame them. He signed a new contract with the Lions recently, and this one does have an NHL out clause. So if the Kraken do want him, that won't be an issue. So Dylan, what do you think of Gronborg? He's a little bit more of an outside-the-box option, but could he be a good fit for the Kraken?
I mean, other than the fact that he doesn't have actual NHL experience, I don't see how he could be a bad fit, really, for them. I think he's done a fantastic job at every level of international hockey that he's coached at. As you said, now he's coaching a club, and again, he's continuing that success. He obviously knows what he's doing. Players everywhere he's ever been have loved him. He's got developmental experience as far as helping young players as well as coaching veterans just on a team and leading them to success. I like it as kind of an off the wall, he's a guy that, is being talked about in NHL circles, but maybe not necessarily for Seattle a lot. But I don't see how things could go wrong, especially when he would be under someone like a Ron Francis, who we've seen what he's done with coaches who didn't have a lot of coaching experience, and Rod Brindlemore, right? Brought him in, and look what happened, as we just talked about. He's one of the top coaches in the NHL now. So I think he would be an excellent choice. Not only that, I mean, he would give Seattle the best facial hair of any coach in the league, and I
Oh,
think that that's
absolutely.
definitely an
Hands down.
important thing. All right, so that's our thoughts on kind of who could be coaching the Seattle Kraken next season. Obviously, we didn't talk about everybody, but these are kind of the people that we both thought were worth bringing up and worth exploring a little bit. If you have a different coaching candidate that you'd like us to talk about, leave it down in the comments. We're going to have a couple months to kind of think about these things and let it all ruminate and listen to what Ron Francis has to say about everything. So also make sure to subscribe to the channel, so if we do any updates along the way about what he's talking about, we got you covered. That's it. Bye.